to Rick's Scale Model Fix and another step-by-step video build. This time we're going to be looking at Airfix's brand new 1/72 scale de Havilland Mosquito B.XVI. I've already uploaded an in-box review of the kit up to the channel, so please go and take a look at that before we commence the step-by-step video build. It'll show you what's in the box and what we can expect of the build. So without further ado, let's get the box top off, get to the workbench and make a start. So before we make a start with the kit, just taking the time out just to label each individual sprue with its letter. This is particularly important as two of the sprues, E and F, are identical. It's just corresponding to the port or starboard side of the airframe. Always a good idea to read through the instruction book prior to starting your build, and we're just going to have a look momentarily at just what the first few stages entail. So it looks like in stage 1 we're building the cockpit, floor, fuselage and bomb bay, floor stroke ceiling, a couple of bulkheads, adding some of the radio gear and the bulkhead behind the observer seat, adding the observer seat itself, pilot seat being added to the front of the airframe, instrument panel being added, and concluding on bottom of page 3 with step 10 with the pilot's control yoke. Good idea as well to just look at common paint colours. So all this section in stage 1 is 78 or interior green, so that can be assembled and then painted as a whole. Similarly in stage 2, the front of the cockpit is 78 interior green again, with a dark green boot round the bottom of the control yoke, so that can be added and sprayed with this being painted separately. Then we start getting into some of the different colours for some of the items being added in stage 3. So you've got the radio being matte black 33 and the bulkhead being 33 matte black and interior green, with this part being interior green. So again, there's some stuff that we can add there, and with some of the other items it's probably a wise move to paint those before you attach them in the relevant locations. So without further ado, let's get some of these parts off the sprues and get the construction underway. So we need part A2, which is the wing spars and cockpit floor. So we're just removing these with a pair of side cutters from sprue A. So going now to sprue C, and we need parts 12 and 13. So again, we'll just remove those. So as you can see in the instructions there's quite a bit of difference between the part and the way it presents itself in the instruction booklet, and that's because all these little casting pins or injection pins all need to be removed. So we're just going to snip these off with our side cutters again. We just need to sand those, and for that we're using Flurry Models dual sander in a medium grit. Solid sanding stick one side, sponge on the other, and we're just making sure that all the parts surfaces are free now of any traces of those attachment points, or indeed any of the mould parting lines. And then we can turn our attention to adding C13 and C12. Same process with these parts, we're just making sure that the mating surfaces and the edges are clean and that there's no rough edges or any trace of those attachment points remaining that will interfere with the fit of the part. So a little bit of time here can save you a lot of time later in rectifying any mistakes due to poor fit because you forgot to remove one of those attachment points. So there's the parts cleaned up. We can set about joining those together now. So referencing the instructions, it goes this way. So C12 is the smaller part, and that goes on like so. So we're just going to use some Tamiya quick set liquid glue and just brushed on to the mating surfaces, held in place whilst the glue dries, and that forms the bulkhead of what looks to be the Bombay. And then C13 goes at the opposite end, and it's nice there to see that you can't really get these mixed up even though they look different, because one has mating pins and a socket. You can't get it the wrong way round because one's long and one's short, so it will only actually go in the correct way. And again, held in place with a quick application of Tamiya quickset glue. So with the cockpit floor at the front added, it was then sandwiched between the fuselage halves while the glue dries. So that just means that when we pull the tape off and separate that, all those parts are in perfect alignment, and we know that they'll fit in their respective location within inside the fuselage without compromising the fit later in the build. So let's just set that to one side while we look at some of the other parts and perhaps get some paint done. So work's progressing well with Airfix's Mosquito. So just off camera, I've been through and painted all the interior parts. Give it a wash just to pick it out. You're not going to see much in there. I've overemphasised some of the details a little, a bit like stage makeup, and the fit of the fuselage together is pretty good. We've added the bulkhead at the back for the tail wheel, and hopefully you can see that detail there. So dry brush with light grey, Tamiya brown wash, and just roughed up a bit after to remove the excess. Both sides, the cockpit done. Fit of the fuselage is pretty good. Not a lot's going to be seen of that cockpit. Talking of the cockpit, we've now completed that. Again, painted interior green, followed the instructions throughout, painted the seats, cushions dark green, bit of the instrument panel. I didn't use the decal, you're not going to see much in there at all. And then the fuel cells have been added to the roof of the Bombay. A dry fit, as always, proves that everything does fit together absolutely fantastically, with no issues found in terms of fit. So it's at that point now we're just going to glue the fuselage together. So I think a good place to start is the nose. It needs to be a pretty good fit there. So copious amount of glue, and we're just going to hold that until the glue dries. It doesn't take long. While we're doing that, we can do the lower seam, making sure everything lines up and everything is true, otherwise you're going to have problems fitting that clear nose. Just get some thinner Tamiya tape there. So we're just going to hold the nose in place with a tightly stretched piece of tape. We're just going to work our way back. Small sections at a time. tail just to just pry out a bit, so I just use the tweezers to hold that together while the glue bites. Just work some glue along that leading edge there where it's a little bit warped. And again, what we're doing is just going to squeeze this together and try and get a bead of glue to come out. And that's just going to act as filler on that leading edge. Rudder post. Then we're going to work our way on along the underside. There's a couple of inserts to go in the belly there. Hopefully they'll fit quite well. And there we go, we shall now set that aside to dry. And we'll work on another section of the model whilst we're waiting for that glue to dry. So with the fuselage seams drying and waiting to be cleaned up, you can make your build progress by looking ahead in the instruction booklet. So that's what we're doing now, and we're going to build up the wings as they're the next stages in our build. There's two sprues in the kit, the E sprue, which is for the starboard side, and the F sprue, which is for the port side. I've already built up the port side and that's gone well. So just having a look at the instruction booklets, I can just guide you through the instructions. It is quite fiddly, but there's some nice design touches there as well. So the first stage is to build up each side of the undercarriage leg, and then using the wheel well and the original position of the final undercarriage assembly, it's saying that you don't glue it and you actually use it as a jig, and then whilst that's in place you add the different components to the undercarriage until it's finally assembled with the mudguard. So just be very careful with your glue, make sure that you don't get it anywhere near the final mounting points, and what you end up with at the end is a rather nice looking compact landing gear that should be in perfect alignment. And then at the end of the build, with the nacelle in place, these will just slot back in to their holes and everything should line up perfectly. There are a few misplaced ejector pin marks, so I don't know if that's intentional on the Airfix part, but there's an ejector pin mark right in the middle and there. I've just left it because it looks a bit structural, but all in all quite a nice looking landing gear leg, quite fiddly to assemble. So all we've got to do to finish that is to add the hydraulic oil tank to the top of the undercarriage. So there's two mounting pins there, making sure that we just get it the right way up, and that just simply slot in place. Just get it the wrong way up. Like so. And then a bit of a quick set from behind just to secure it in place. And there's the overall unit waiting for painting. So that can be set aside. If you're working on the sides individually, just make sure that you identify which is port and starboard. So turning the page sees the construction of the main tyres for the main gear, and that's two halves with separate hubs which will make painting a lot easier, and they're then added to your previously built up undercarriage legs. Turning our attention to the lower wing, part B7, and we do need to open up some holes if you intend on using the slipper tanks. I've not added, I'm not going to add the landing light lenses because I'll make those with crystal clear at the end of the build. So we're going to use the slipper tanks on my model, so using the prescribed 1mm drill bit, and I'm just going to open those up. Like so, and then you can just simply cut off the raised parts by holding the knife blade flush to the plastic on the other side. So we'll set that to one side while we have a look at these wheels. So this is the e-spray. So we're just going to remove these wheels. And there's the hub detail that will make painting so much easier. They've got some lovely moulded tread pattern, so we don't want to be spending too much time or going in there too heavily to clean up any mating surfaces. So just make sure that you have cleaned up everything to the best that you can do, so that we get a perfect joint when we bring these two together. We're just going to try it. They have got a weighted portion at the bottom, so be careful which way you do key them. Perfect fit, you can't even see that join line. So we're just going to run our Tamiya extra thin round the tread. Tiny squeeze. One thing I will say is that you need to just sand the tread blocks off the weighted part, otherwise it's going to sit slightly raised up off the base or the shelf, and it's going to look a little bit odd. So that's the wheel done. So I've got the upper wing surface as in part stage 67, and we're just going to bring these two together. So we're just cleaning up everything. It's really important to pick up on some of these attachment points, because due to the way they're situated on the model, it will make cleaning up quite difficult once they're in their final positions. So just checking the dry fit of the parts just to make sure. And as I found on the other side, there is an ejector pin mark here that has some erased circular plastic that does interfere with the fit. So it's just wise just to take that down. There should be another one on the corresponding side, which is there. Checking that one as well, that's a bit raised. That should improve the fit at the wingtips, which is important because we've got a separate wingtip part. So the fit is good. So using Tamiya white top, I'm just going to place a bit of glue on each of the location pins and along the trailing edge across the wingtip. not too close to the edge because we don't want it all to ooze out when we bring the halves together. And this is a slower setting glue, so it just gives us time to manipulate the parts into position. So we're just working our way around the leading and trailing edges with our regular quick set. Like I said, we've not added the landing light glass. I'm going to make that with micro crystal clear at the end of the build. And I'm just going to put a crocodile clip just on the end there, the wing root, just to hold everything together. We'll just set that aside to dry. Marching through the instructions at a rapid pace, and we're now going to start construction of the nacelle. I'll just leave the clear wing tip until the glue has dried on that wing. So interesting to see that they've split the exhausts into upper and lower portions. And again, we've got some nice design features included in the kit. So we've got some arrows to point out the direction of the mounting box for those exhausts. Again, internet chatter, something to watch out for in your kit if you're watching this before you start your build, is just make sure that you have got completely moulded exhausts. In some kits it's been reported that there's been some short shots. So I've just removed parts E26 and E27 and they've fitted together quite well in a sort of zip fashion, and we're just going to apply our glue to the rear of this. Okay, so we've got to observe the arrows in stage 74, so making sure that we get these the right way around so it fits within the nacelle side. So we're just looking at the arrows, making sure they match, and it's a mirror image, so when you flip it over, if you turn it slightly, you should have the arrow facing to the left. And then we're going to load the recess up with some glue, and we're just going to drop our exhaust stacks into the recess, making sure they're straight and lined up. So again, reaching for our instruction booklet, and it shows part A5 in this direction, so you want the arrow facing forward and the arrow to the top, and they do sit in to the recess in the nacelle quite well. I'm just going to secure that with some more glue. Just going to hold that in place because there is a little bit of tension in the plastic there. I'm putting a lot of glue in here, as the last thing you want is later on in the build for these to pop out and fall inside the nacelle. And then the two sections should come together quite nicely. So just checking that for the fit, which is good. There's nothing impeding the fit of those parts. So we just need now to add the bulkheads as in stage 76, so we need E13 and E17. So there's a little recess and a little key at the rear of the nacelle there for the location. So we'll just put that in. Probably the other way up would help. And similarly at the front there, just making sure that we've got no sprue attachment points that are going to spread the fit of that nacelle. So everything fits in there quite nicely, so we'll just make sure everything's lined up on the inside, which it is. And we're just going to add some glue to the inside of the parts just to start off the joining process. And then just pinching the rear with the nacelle together and just working some glue into the inside. We're just going to use that together, just make sure it's all lined up. And again at the front. So it's interesting to note that the vents have been moulded as separate parts. So some of you will be thinking, well, that's just a pain. But what it does mean is that when you clean this seam up along here, it means that you're not sanding the detail off from the vents, and they are a perfect fit, or they were on the other side. So we've added the mounting for the prop, and we're just going to add the chin intake. And again, the fit is really good. So we've glued it up onto the bit where the spinner will be hiding, so we can avoid any unsightly seams. And then we're just going to put a bit of glue around there, around the joint, just to secure it in place. And I think you'll agree that that's a pretty good fit. So we've got the underside of that nacelle built up, and everything thankfully fits quite well. There is a little bit of a step on this chin intake, so we're just going to take care of that. Just careful sanding. The glue is still a little bit wet, but we'll get away with that, I think. Perhaps need a tiny bead of Mr. Surfacer in there when we're done, just to even things out. But all those intakes have gone in really well. Just broke one of the exhausts, that's not good. So now we're ready to join this to the wing. So a bit of test fitting proves that the fit is absolutely perfect, especially around this rear sort of trailing edge. I'm just going to bend this down slightly because it was a little bit springy. And that closes that. So we're going to start there, and we're just going to whack our glue, and we're just going to hold it under finger pressure. Doesn't take long for the glue to bite, and then we're just going to work down the inboard side and the outboard side, and again just gentle pressure to hold it in place. You don't want any beads of glue forming. And then we can work onto the nose section, or the nose of the nacelle, which is actually a panel line, and the fit is really good. This is where you need to take care in the previous section of the build, because if you are out with your sockets of the exhaust, it would interfere with the fit of the top of the cowling of the nacelle. So again, just holding that with finger pressure. It's got a bit of a spring in it there, so I'll just use some Tamiya tape just to keep it in place, I think. So we're now ready to add our wings. So I've just put some super glue on those spars, and we're just going to quickly slide it in and hold it in place while the super glue bites. So this is where your test fitting comes in again, because it means that we know that the fit was pretty good. So we can just slide it in there, super glue secures it, and the wings are on the model. So we're just checking for alignment, so both wingtips should be equal, which they are. And I've also added that clear wingtip on the end of the wing there. So all we need to do now is just add some glue to the underside, and this is just to reinforce the joint and make sure that everything is good. And we're just going to add a bead along the upper surface as well. And we're now going to leave that to dry thoroughly. So all the wings are now drying nicely, and we'll let that glue fully harden. I've already added the rudder to the model, as you probably saw in the later stages of the video. I've built up the elevators, and I'm pleased to report the sink mark that I was so critical of in the review is actually hidden when the parts are in place, and the parts do actually lock into place using like a key system, and they just push in firmly, and then we can add our liquid cement from the underneath to preserve a nice panel gap at the top, and we're ready to progress with some of the other areas of the model. So that will conclude this part of the Airfix Mosquito B.XVI build. So please join me in part 2, where we'll look at getting some primer on, checking our seams and getting ready to apply the paint scheme.